I've tried to forget, but I can't. The memories keep slipping through. They tell me it wasn't real, that I imagine it, but I know what happened. I need to tell someone before I forget again. I'll recount everything as it's still clear in my head. I'll make another post to complete my account of the events. Due to my attempt to get everything here as descriptive as possible, I needed to split it into, please. If anyone has found themselves stretched close to death, have you found yourself in this strange place? I awoke with a jolt, lurching upright in bed, gasping for air as if I had just surfaced from drowning. My chest heaved. My fingers clutched at the soft sheets beneath me, softer than anything I had ever slept on before. My head was spinning. The scent of fresh pine drifted through the air, carried by a cool spring breeze that rustled the white curtains. Sunlight streamed in, flooding the rustic wooden room with a warm glow. I sat there, frozen, trying to piece together what had happened. The ship, the storm, Claire, Wyatt, Theron. Was I dead? A creak at the door made me snap my head toward it. A man stepped inside with gentle movements, his face kind yet unfamiliar. He had dark hair, streaked with gray at the temples, and deep-set wrinkles that framed his kind smile. His eyes were blue and bright and gleamed as he spoke. "Good morning, Elliot," he said, crossing the room and settling onto the bed beside me. His hand reached out, warm and steady, rubbing my back like a father comforting a restless child. I flinched away. "Who are you?" My voice was hoarse. "How do you know my name?" He chuckled, a warm, pleasant sound. "I'm your father, of course. Why wouldn't I know your name?" "My father?" No, that wasn't right. My father worked on a ship. My father smelled of oil and salt. Not like chocolate. "Father?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "What is this? What's happening? Am I dead? Are you God?" His laughter came again, light-hearted but strangely dismissive. "That dream really shook you up, didn't it?" He patted my shoulder. "Come on, let's get you some breakfast. Your mother's making French toast." I didn't move. "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what's going on." The man sighed, still smiling, but there was something behind his expression now, something unreadable. "I already told you, son. I'm your dad. Now, come eat before your food gets cold." My thoughts raced. Everything in me screamed that something was wrong, but my stomach betrayed me. I was starving. Hesitantly, I slid out of bed and followed him into the hall. The cabin stretched long, lined with identical wooden doors. As we walked, we reached a staircase leading down to a grand entryway. A massive antler chandelier hung from the ceiling, casting long shadows across a red-carpeted floor. The scent of cinnamon grew stronger. We passed through a set of double doors into a wide room that resembled a strange market stall. Rows upon rows of glass vials lining a long station that sat in the center of the room. They contained liquid in shifting colors, starting deep brown on one end and transitioning into vibrant hues as they progressed toward the right. I wanted to ask what they were, but something about them made me keep silent. We kept walking until we entered what looked like a rustic diner. Booths lined the walls, and wooden tables filled the space. The scent of warm syrup and French toast filled the air. The moment we stepped inside, the entire room fell silent. Every person, men, women, and children, turned toward us in sync. They stared at us, their faces blank. Then they all spoke in unison. "Good morning, Dad." Then, just as quickly, they turned back to their meals, carrying on as if nothing had happened. I felt my stomach twist with unease. The man led me to an empty table and sat down across from me. A woman soon approached, carrying 2 plates. She looked older than him, her face deeply lined, her curly blonde hair pulled into a loose bun. She set down our breakfast of scrambled eggs and golden French toast before pouring me a glass of orange juice. "OJ as usual," she said with a smile before turning to the man sitting in front of me. How'd she know orange juice was my favorite? My mind ached almost as much as my stomach. "Coffee, Dad?" she asked, her voice sweet but flat. "Black, as usual," the man replied, cutting into his food. I reached for my fork, eager to eat and push aside the anxiety in my chest. But before I could take a bite, his hand shot out, stopping me. Not yet, Elliot." His fingers curled firmly around my wrist. I haven't said good morning to Dad yet. His voice light, his grip firm. To firm. His blue eyes locked onto mine. I hesitated, my stomach twisting with hunger and discomfort. I swallowed hard. Good morning, Dad. His grip loosened. He beamed. Attaboy. He went back to his food. That's what Dad likes to see. Obedient children are good children. I clenched my fork, forcing myself to eat despite my sudden loss of appetite. After a few bites, I couldn't help but speak. You're not my father. The man's smile didn't waver, but he stopped chewing. He tilted his head slightly. What was that? I swallowed. You're not my father. This time, I said it louder. My father works on a ship. He's a mechanic. He's the kindest man you'll ever meet. The man sighed, shaking his head. I don't know what you're talking about, Elliot. His voice was still gentle, but it carried a cold undertone. You must still be confused. You seem to be having trouble knowing what's real and what's just a dream. The fork in my hand trembled. My pulse pounded in my ears. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know who these people were, and I wasn't sure if I had ever known them at all. I ate in silence, forcing each bite past the lump in my throat. The food was good. Perfect. Even, but there was something off about it. Every flavor was heightened, exaggerated, like a memory of breakfast rather than the real thing. The man across from me, Dad, ate without another word. His demeanor, unbothered, as if my outburst had never happened. The woman, Mom, moved around the dining hall, tending to others with the same soft expression. The people at the table spoke in quiet murmurs, laughter occasionally popping through the room. I kept my head down. I didn't want to meet anyone's eyes. Then, from the corner of my vision, I saw them. 2 children sat in a booth near the far wall, watching me. A thin, dark-skinned girl with braided hair and hollow cheeks. And beside her, a pale, bald boy with soft features and large, glassy eyes. They were younger than me, maybe 10 or 11, but something about them felt old. When they saw my eyes meet theirs, they quickly looked away, going back to their food, shoveling it into their mouths. I looked away quickly. The moment breakfast ended, Dad clapped his hands together. All right, kiddo and yo kiddo. Let's get you back to bed. You've had a rough morning. Why don't you head to your room and rest a bit longer? I'll have Mom check on you once we're done cleaning up from breakfast. He got up, gathered our plates, and carried them to the kitchen, leaving me sitting there alone. I didn't know what to do. Should I try to run to the front door and leave? What were all those vials? Should I ask someone? Anyone? What was happening? My mind spiraled with questions, each one leading to another. But despite everything, a deep feeling inside made me feel like I should listen to Dad. I got up from the table and walked through the dining hall and back into the main hallway. People greeted me as I passed, saying, "Good morning, Elliot," but I ignored them. I just kept walking, my feet carrying me back upstairs, back to my room. The scent of pine and damp cloth lingered in the air. It felt familiar now, nostalgic. When I reached my room, it was exactly as I had left it. The walk had felt natural, as if I'd done it a million times before. I sat down, inhaling the familiar scent of the room. But something itched at the edge of my mind. I turned to the window and froze. Beyond the glass stretched an endless ocean, a vast, rolling sea, glistening under a perfect blue sky. My stomach dropped. The ship, my family, my real family, my friends. How had I forgotten them? How had I let them slip away so easily? I gripped the windowsill, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I thought about climbing through the window, running across the grass, into the sand, and down to the water. Maybe if I reached the ocean, I'd remember everything. Maybe I'd wake up. But I stayed. Trapped in a body that didn't feel like my own. My mind spiraled further out of control. I crawled back into bed and wept, burying my face in the pillows, sobbing until my chest ached. Until I felt empty. A soft knock at the door startled me. "Elliot?" A woman's voice. I wiped my face and swallowed the lump in my throat. "Come in." The woman from the dining hall entered. "Mom." "Oh, baby, what's the matter?" she asked, a worried look spreading across her face as she hurried over and knelt beside my bed. I'm just so confused. I choked out between sobs. I don't know what's real or what's not. What's happening? I don't know you. I covered my face with my hands. Shaking, she wrapped her arms around me, pulling me close. Her warmth seeped into my skin, comforting me. Oh, sweetheart, she cooed, stroking my hair. Of course you know who I am. I'm your mom. Honey. I clung to her, my sobs quieting as my breathing settled. You just had a bad dream. Baby, she murmured, rocking me gently. It's all over now. Mommy's here. She held me for a long time until my trembling stopped and my mind felt lighter, as if she had smoothed over the edges of my thoughts. Sorry. Mum. I mumbled, rubbing my eyes. It's okay, sweetie. Dreams can be scary. But you're here now. You're home now. With your family. She smiled, rubbing my back. Why don't you rest? Put on a movie. She stood and walked over to the TV in the corner of the room, turning it on. Pick something you like, she said. It can come down for lunch whenever you're feeling up to it. Lunch? I asked, looking at her confused. But we just ate breakfast. She chuckled softly. Elliot, you've been up here for hours. Don't be silly. I felt an emptiness consume me as I heard her words. Hours? I swear I just gotten up here. Get some rest now, honey. You look exhausted, she said in a warm tone as she quietly closed the door. I pushed the worry out of my head, lifting myself up from the bed. I walked to the cabinet beneath the TV. I opened it and pulled out a box of DVDs. Inside were all the classics: Terminator 2, Rambo, Predator, Back to the Future 1, 3. You name it. My fingers hesitated over the case. How did they know? I loved old 80s movies. I grabbed The Return of Godzilla and threw it into the DVD player, settling into my bed and watching the movie. As the movie started, a familiar grainy opening sequence filled the screen. The low hum of the soundtrack vibrated through the room, grounding me to something real, something mine. I pulled the blanket over my shoulders and let the film play, but my mind drifted. How did they know? How did they know these were my favorites? How did they know I always skipped Back to the Future too? I tried to shake the thought, trying to focus on what was happening on screen. I saw the ocean, the submarine. A deep unease stirred in me. Something beyond the film. The ocean, the ship, my father, my real father. The air in my room suddenly felt heavier, like the walls were pressing in. I gripped the blanket tighter. Then I heard a soft creak. Not from the movie, from inside the room. Slowly, I turned my head toward the door. It was open just a crack. Someone was standing there. Two figures, small and unmoving. The thin girl, her expression blank, stood beside the pale, bald boy from the diner earlier. They didn't say anything. They just watched. I shivered with discomfort. I spoke softly. Can I help you? The girl tilted her head slightly. The boy blinked, his face unreadable. Then, in perfect unison, they turned and walked away, disappearing into the dimly lit hallway. I sat up, my heartbeat hammering in my chest. I should stay in my room. I should, but something inside me refused. I threw off the blanket and climbed out of bed, stepping carefully toward the door. The hallway was quiet. The scent of old wood stronger than before. The warm glow from the wall lights flickered slightly, like a candle in a draft. I peeked out, looking down the hall. The two children were just ahead. Turning a corner, without thinking, I followed. I stepped into the hallway, my bare feet sinking into the plush carpet. The air was still. The only sound was the faint noise from the TV behind me. Muffled as I pulled the door shut, I quickened my pace, careful to keep quiet. As I rounded the bend, I caught sight of them at the far end of the hall. They stood in front of a door. It looked like any other room in the cabin, however, simply looking at it. Staring down that hall made my skin crawl. The girl pressed her small hand against the knob but didn't turn it. The boy just stood there, staring at the wood as if he could see through it. I stopped, keeping my distance. Why are you watching me? What's in there? I asked anxiously. They didn't react right away. Then, the girl turned her head just enough to glance at me over her shoulder. Her eyes, deep and dark, didn't hold any malice, just curiosity. You don't remember? She asked. Her voice was quiet and unsettling. The boy finally turned to face me. "You shouldn't be here," he said dryly. "I live here," I muttered, though the words felt wrong in my mouth. The girl gave a small smile. "Do you?" I didn't know how to respond. The boy took a step forward. "Go back to your room, Elliot." It wasn't a threat, but it wasn't a request either. I wanted to listen. I should listen. But my eyes flickered back to the door. Something inside me screamed that I needed to know what was behind it. I swallowed hard. "What's in there?" I asked again. The girl turned fully now, watching me carefully. "You already asked that." I hesitated, stepping closer. "And you didn't answer." The boy frowned, glancing at me before looking at the girl. "He's not ready." My fingers twitched at my sides. Before I could say anything else, the girl reached for the knob and turned it. "Elliot," a voice cut through the silence. I spun around. Dad stood at the other end of the hallway, his expression calm but defiant. "Get away from there." I hesitated. The girl and boy didn't move, didn't even look at him. Dad took a step closer, his smile tight. "Now, son?" I looked back at the door. "Elliot, get over here now." Dad spoke in a loud voice. The command hit me like a slap, and for moments, I froze. His words echoed in my head. The door seemed to pulse, calling me back, begging me to step closer. But Dad's voice cut through the invisible, forestalling me there. I turned fully to face him. His eyes bore into mine, and the smile on his face had shifted, no longer kind but instead cold, intense. The urge to move toward the door battled with the fear that crept up my spine. I steadied myself. "What's behind that door?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. Out of frustration and fear, Dad's jaw clenched. "Don't ask about things you don't understand, Elliot." He took another step forward, his presence filling the narrow hallway like a wall. The hall seemed to tighten just slightly. It was suffocating, but I couldn't escape the door. Something was hidden behind it. The girl's voice broke the silence, soft, as if she was speaking to herself. "You'll forget," she said quietly. "You'll forget everything." The boy spoke, his tone flat, and not ready to remember. I felt my chest tighten. "What do you mean? Not ready?" My words slipping out before I could stop them. Dad stepped forward again, stretching out his hand, trying to reassure me. It only made me feel smaller. "Come with me, Elliot," he said, his voice softer now but still insistent. "Let's get you back to your room." I glanced at the door one last time. There was something there I couldn't name. I could almost feel it in my bones, like a whisper just beyond the reach of my understanding. With a final glance at the children, whose expressions hadn't changed at all, I turned toward Dad and moved back down the hall. The air felt different now, less suffocating but still hanging with tension. As we reached the top of the stairs, Dad placed a hand on my shoulder. "You don't need to know everything right now," he said, his voice slow. "Everything will make sense when the time is right." I nodded, but inside, my mind raced, questions swirling around the edges of my thoughts. What was it that I wasn't ready to understand? What was up with those two? What was behind that door? Who are they? "Dead?" I asked, following him back to my room. "Anthozoa and Erinaceus?" he asked, sounding a little surprised I didn't know. "Your brother and sister. Of course. Those two are always getting into trouble." He shook his head with a smile. "I'll see to it they get a stern talking to." I didn't say anything else as I followed him down the hall. Something didn't sit right about the way he spoke about them. Brother and sister. They didn't look anything like me. Not even close. But Dad's words reverberated in my mind, and I let it go, trying to push the confusion to the back of my thoughts. Their family. The next days, weeks, or months passed. I couldn't tell how long time went on. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, slipping through my fingers like sand. The mornings blurred together, one breakfast after another, the same routine, the same faces. At some point, I stopped counting the days. I woke up, ate, watched TV or read. I didn't leave my room much. No one really came to check on me anymore. Mom, Dad, and the other adults were busy with something. I wasn't sure what. I would spend some of my time with my siblings, spending time in the glass breaking room, where we would destroy vials, flasks, and other small glass items with hammers and similar tools. We'd also play video games, build puzzles, and other activities. I tried to remember bits and pieces of my past, faces, places, and fragments of my life before. But the harder I tried, the foggier it became. Why did I feel like there was something I was supposed to know? My old life felt so far away, like a dream that was slipping through my consciousness, out of reach. I didn't have an old life. This was my old life. I'd occasionally see Anthozoa and Erinaceus. Each time it happened, it would cause my stomach to sink. I never spent time with them, as they would always put me in unease. They would always be playing or talking together, their odd smiles never quite leaving their faces. They were always together, never apart. Maybe it's normal, I thought. Siblings stick together. But something about their presence felt off. Like they were always waiting for something to happen. Something they were a part of that I couldn't understand. I never went back to the room. The one that made me feel so uncomfortable. Dad knew best. If I wasn't meant to go in there, then I wins. My biggest peeve in my day-to-day was going to the bathroom. The room was located on the first floor and down the hall in the opposite direction of the diner. The bathroom appeared like any other bathroom you'd find in a lodge. However, the exterior wall was entirely glass. You could see that the lodge sat on a peninsula as the ocean stretched out from all sides. The peninsula arched off into the distance out of view, beautiful, lush, and green, surrounded by sandy beaches and crystal blue sea. It never rained. It never stormed. Storms. The sea. I hated this. I couldn't stand to look out the window. It made me ache. There were more lodges across the green. I would see figures moving outside them sometimes. I never went outside. It's not that I couldn't. My siblings went swimming often. But I was just okay with staying inside. Leaving. Oh God, just the thought made me want to shrink up and cry. One afternoon, after years that felt like days of routine, Dad finally approached me. Elliot, we've got something new for you to learn, he said, his voice calm, but there was an edge to it now. It's time for you to start learning how we make the vials. I had seen the vials before, rows and rows of them, lined up in the strange market booth-like area, but I hadn't given them much thought until now. Curiosity stirred within me. I followed Dad down the same hallway I had walked through so many times. But this time, I was hyper-aware of every step, every creak of the floor beneath us. We entered the central room beyond the lobby where the vials lay. The room was dimly lit, the air filled with the scent of something unfamiliar. In the center of the room stood the station, covered with vials lined up neatly in rows. Some were empty, others half filled with different colored liquids that seemed to shimmer in the low light. This is where it all happens, Dad said, his voice low in reverence. He motioned for me to come closer. You'll learn to make them yourself. The vials are important, Elliot. You'll understand why soon enough. I stood there, my mind swirling with confusion and curiosity, but mostly with a deep, unsettling feeling. Something was off about all of this. Something was wrong. Dad handed me a small vial, its contents a murky brown liquid. This, my son, is what you don't want. He opened it, taking a swig. Delicious, but useless, he said, handing it to me. Drink. Don't be afraid. I held the vial in my hands, my fingers trembling. The brown liquid was thick and flaky. I touched my lips to the edge of the vial and poured the contents into my mouth. It tasted sweet, like melted chocolate mixed with the greatest piece of fruit you'd ever bitten into. That is good, I said, smiling. He smiled back. Why don't we drink these more often? I asked, grabbing another one from the shelf. Because, my child, that would be a waste. He motioned to the gradient of vials, pointing at the brightly colored bottles. The liquid can be turned back into what we need, what we use. Let me show you. He took the brown liquid from my hands and opened a cabinet beneath the station, revealing rows of small flasks. Pick one, he said, motioning to the array. I knelt down and looked at the containers, each one labeled with a different animal. I grabbed one labeled duck. Good choice, he said as I stood. Now pour that into the vial I'm holding, he instructed. I opened the flask, and as I did so, the sound of a quack whispered from the bottle. I jumped slightly, and Dad let out a chuckle. Don't be afraid. Now, pour. I poured the flask into the vial. Pink smoke flowed into the flask, swirling with the brown liquid. As it touched the substance, it slowly began to change, turning into a bright pink, clear fluid, similar to the smoke. Once all the liquid was pink, I closed the flask back up and put it away. "Look at that," Dad said with a smile. "You actually did it," he said, shaking his head. He swirled the vial around a bit and placed it back on the shelf. I wasn't worried one bit. I knew you were ready. I can always tell. "Ready for what?" I asked. "To make vials. That's what. All you need to know is that you can do it now. And not ready to know everything yet. Child, just trust your father." He patted me on the back as we walked out. "I'm so proud of you, Elliot, and making the whole family proud." He ruffled my hair a bit. "No, I got to get back to work. Sport." He spoke as he walked away from the room, leaving me standing there. I turned away from the room and walked toward the lobby, the soft sound of my footsteps echoing loudly in the silence. Dad's words still lingered in my ears, "Trust your father." He'd said it so many times before. Yet, this time, it felt different. This time, I wasn't so sure. As I passed through the grand entryway, I caught a glimpse of Anthozoa and Erinaceus. They stood in the shadow of the stairwell, watching me. Their faces were expressionless, but there was something in the way they looked at me that made my stomach tighten. I tried to ignore them, but they didn't break eye contact. It unnerved me. As we kept staring, I suddenly felt my mind break. I grabbed my head as I felt it begin to ache. A sharp, stabbing pain pulsed through my skull, spreading like wildfire. My hand shook as I dug my nails into my scalp, trying to steady myself. I felt cold, my skin prickling as if I were submerged in icy water. My heart raced, and the world around me began to warp. The walls of the hallway dissolved into mist, and suddenly, I was no longer in the house. The sharp scent of salt water filled my nostrils. I looked around, and the hall was gone, replaced by the blinding flashes of lightning and the relentless crash of waves. I was on a ship. The sound was overwhelming. The wind howled like an animal, pushing against me with force. The rain pelted me like bullets, stinging my skin, the cold water soaking me to the bone. My clothes clung to me, heavy with the weight of the storm. The ship creaked and groaned beneath me. The deck slick with water as I staggered to my feet, struggling to stay upright. I felt my heart pounding, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I couldn't make sense of any of it. I was in the middle of a storm that felt real. My legs gave out beneath me, and I collapsed to the deck, gasping for air, clutching at the wet wood as though it could anchor me to something solid. The cold water covered my body, my chest tightening as I gasped for breath, my heart racing in panic. The sound of the storm consumed me, a deafening roar in my ears. I crumpled on the ground, shivering, unable to understand why I was there or what was happening. I wanted to scream, to call out for help, but my voice was lost in the chaos. Then, as if the storm itself had swallowed me whole, everything vanished. In the blink of an eye, I was back. My chest heaved. My breath ragged as I lay on the cold floor of the hallway. The world felt distorted, as if I had just woken from a nightmare, but the lingering sensation of the storm still clung to me. I blinked, trying to steady myself. I looked up. Anthozoa and Erinaceus stood over me, their eyes cold and unblinking. The hallway was still unchanged, but the air felt heavier, charged with something I couldn't explain. My head throbbed. The pain was dull now, but the disorienting feeling lingered. My hand trembled as I reached up to touch my face, expecting to feel rainwater. But there was nothing. "Follow us quickly, Elliot." Anthozoa's voice urgently broke through the haze of my mind. I stared at her, unable to move for a moment. My mind felt fragmented, as if parts of it were still lost somewhere in the storm I had just experienced. My hand hung in the air, trembling, the wetness on my skin no longer there, leaving only the sting of cold on my fingertips. Erinaceus didn't say anything. He just stood there, his gaze steady and unwavering, as if waiting for something. "Now, Elliot," Anthozoa's voice snapped, more forceful this time, pulling me from my paralysis. I stumbled to my feet, my legs shaky, my head still reeling from the vision. It felt like something was slipping from me, like I was losing hold of myself, losing pieces of who I was. I wanted to question them, asked them what was happening. But the words caught in my throat. I was too afraid to speak. Too afraid of what they might say or what might happen if I didn't do as they said. I followed them. Anthozoa and Erinaceus didn't speak. Their feet gliding effortlessly across the floor. I could barely make out the soft scrape of their feet against the carpet as we climbed the central stairs. The steps squeaked as we ascended. I glanced behind me, unsure if I had the courage to go further, but the pressure of their presence pushed me forward. We reached the landing at the top of the stairs, and as I followed them, we turned sharply to the left. My breath caught in my throat as I saw the door at the end of the hallway. My memory flickered, and I realized this was the same room from before, the one that had felt so wrong when I had come to it earlier. The air was cold, and the walls pulsed with a quiet, hidden menace. The door loomed ahead, and my feet felt heavy. Anthozoa and Erinaceus didn't wait for me to gather my thoughts. They simply opened the door, and with a gentle push, I was ushered inside. The room was a vast and endless hallway that stretched far beyond my sight in either direction. The walls were lined with old arcade machines, each one glowing with a strange, unnatural light that cast long, shifting shadows across the space. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice trembling as I looked back at the two children. Their cold eyes were locked on me, unblinking, unfeeling. "Remember, Elliot," they spoke in unison, their voices a strange blend of desperation and command. The words seemed to vibrate in the air, hang like a weight. "Remember," they repeated, louder this time. The urgency in their voices sent a shiver down my spine. It felt as if something important was slipping away from me, something that I couldn't grasp no matter how hard I tried. "You must remember, Elliot," they said together. "Play." Erinaceus spoke, his finger pointing toward the nearest machine. I felt a deep, gnawing fear coil in my gut. I wanted to run, to turn and flee, but my body wouldn't obey. It felt as though the room itself was pulling me toward the machines. "I don't want to. Please. Can we leave?" My voice cracked as I pleaded, my heart pounding in my chest, my hands shaking at my sides. I could feel the cold sweat trickling down my back. "You must play, Elliot," Erinaceus repeated, his voice even colder this time. "We are running out of time." Anthozoa spoke. She pointed toward the machine again, and her gaze bore into me, urging me, begging me, demanding me. "Play." I felt trapped. There was no way out. Slowly, I turned, walking toward the machine, each step dragging me closer to something I couldn't comprehend. As I neared it, the screen flickered and the words "Hello, Elliot" appeared across the display in bold, cheerful letters. My heart raced in my chest as I stared at the screen. The image changed. It was a beach, beautiful and serene, the sand stretching out in all directions, the waves gently lapping at the shore. A message flashed across the screen. "Start." I sat there, my body trembling. I didn't want to do this, but I felt a force, something unseen but undeniable, pushing me forward. The screen seemed to pull me in, beckoning me to click the start button. My hand shook as I reached for it, and with a shaky breath, I pressed the button. The world around me seemed to blur, the room fading into the distance as the game swallowed me whole. I found myself on a beach. The sky was dark. No moon or stars hung above, casting everything in an inky blackness. The ocean lapped at the shore quietly and calmly, as though even the ocean understood it was night. Standing on the shore, I saw three figures, small children. They stood there in the darkness, motionless, staring at me. I walked toward them slowly at first, my body moving with hesitation. Soon, an inexplicable urgency took over. My pace quickened, and I found myself running, sprinting toward them, my heart pounding in my chest. The beach seemed to stretch infinitely as I ran, the shore pulling away from me with each step. My feet began to ache, and my legs grew heavier. I couldn't stop. I kept running, the sound of my feet pounding into the sand echoing in my ears. The beach, endless and unyielding, continued to stretch out before me. I felt my breath quicken, and soon tears welled up in my eyes. The wind picked up, howling through the night, and though the sky remained clear, I could hear the distant rumblings of a storm. The waves crashed harder against the shore, and thunder boomed from some unseen place. I heard the sound of metal creaking, the ocean's water twisting into machines I couldn't see. My heart raced as I cried out, "Come back." My voice broke. "I can't lose you. Please." The words hung in the air, distorted by the unnatural noise surrounding me. Then, I heard it. A voice. It was faint at first, barely a whisper, but it grew louder. "Elliot." A voice echoed in my ears, sharp and desperate. "Elliot?" The voice was screaming now. I turned around, my heart skipping a beat. There, standing at the edge of the beach where the sand met the grass, was Dad. The glow of the cabin behind him bathed him in soft light, casting long shadows across the ground. "Come back here right now, son." His voice was filled with a strange intensity. "You should not be out here so late." I froze, the weight of his words pressing against me. The figures on the beach and the storm had gone. Only Dad's voice remained, cutting through the chaos. He was real. He was here. "I've had enough of this foolishness. Boy, obedient children are good children." With that, he snapped his fingers, and suddenly, I was back in the lobby of the cabin. Dad stood next to me, wearing a long cloak that covered his face with a hood. In front of me, the inhabitants of the cabin stood in a massive circle around the outer edges of the lobby. Hundreds of cloaked figures, their robes hiding their faces, surrounded the room. The two staircases and the hall above were filled with people, turning the main entrance into an arena. "Come, child. It is time." He spoke, his voice firm, leading me through the crowd of hooded figures. A heavy silence surrounded me as I walked, feeling their eyes on me, though I couldn't see their faces. As I broke through the crowd, I finally saw what they encircled. In the center, lying on the red carpet, was Anthozoa. She lay crumpled on the floor, her face pale, sickly, her body trembling.